All right, thanks, Stephanie. So I'm Laura Lindsay. I'm the soybean small grain agronomist, and I'm going to start a little bit about some of our previous cover crop research, and then let Jamie and Taylor talk about some new cover crop research that kind of piggybacks off what we've done in the past. So one thing that I'm really interested in, if you haven't noticed, is planting date. Planting date is the #1 management factor that influences soybean yield. So it's a really important thing to look at. We have a big planting date study planned for this year. Aaron, the last time I had a big planting date study was 2019. And so planning planting date studies gives me a lot of anxiety because I hope that doesn't happen. But 2021, 2022, we had a planting date study at several locations in Ohio. And really, our previous work was all with more normal planting dates, so maybe end of April, first week of May. We really wanted to push it for this research because we can. Like Aaron said, our risk is not nearly as great as what yours are as farmers. So we planted the ultra early, first week of April, early last week of April, and then normal planting date, which would have been mid-May. And then we wanted to have a cover crop component to this as well. The previous year in 2020, I had talked to a farmer who planted really early and had a cover crop, and then some late snow in May, and he felt that that cover crop helped protect his soybeans. So I was like, that's a really cool thing to test. So we had 3 cover crop treatments for each planting date, none. So that's the picture here. Rye terminated early, so we planted into a dead cover crop. And then rye terminated late, which was planted green, and you've heard that word a couple of times today even. So basically we planted into a living cover crop and then killed it with a herbicide within 1 week of planting. 2 locations, 2 years, so we were in Northeast Ohio and Worcester, and then Clark County and South Charleston, so pretty 2 distinct growing locations and conditions. Soils tend to warm up quicker in Clark County compared to Worcester. These are our dates, and this is really something that never happens in research, is that our dates are almost the same across years and locations, which is really cool. So our cover crop was cereal rye, planted October 14th, October 15th. Ultra early, we did hit our goal for the first week of April. Last year in South Charleston, it was March 30th, a little bit earlier. The early planting date was very consistently that last week of April. And our normal planting date, remember, we were targeting mid-May. The rain turns on in mid-May. I've never looked at this statistically, but Aaron, mid-May, May 15th, whatever happens in Ohio, I feel like it rains and we can't plant. Okay, I will ask you about that. But we, get pushed back until the last week of May for planting. And really, I think that's why planting day is important. If you're waiting maybe for the perfect day in mid-May, sometimes you get pushed back till end of May or June. So I'm not going to talk much about cover crop biomass, but basically in terms of cover crop biomass, the longer you let your cover crop grow, the more biomass you're going to get. And if you listen to the weed science talks earlier, that biomass should help in terms of weed control. This is our first year, first location. This is Worcester, Ohio. So these soybeans were planted on April 6th. I went out on May 13th to look and see what I could see, and it was a little ugly, or maybe a lot ugly. What we saw were a lot of hypocotyls, or just stems coming out of the ground with no cotyledons, some bean leaf beetle feeding here. I think there were slugs, probably diseases, and then some soil crusting. So you can see here this cotyledon is stuck. When you plant really early, and it takes a while for those plants to germinate and emerge, you're more susceptible to soil crusting, and that's where this on-farm research kind of feeds into this as well. So I'm going to go through these results pretty quickly, so Jamie and Taylor have time, but I'll have time for questions afterwards, and I'll be sticking around if you guys have questions. But this is Worcester. This is our yield. So what you're looking at here is the last week of April, or first week of April, last week of April, and then last week of May. And the 3 shades of green indicate no cover crop, early terminated cover crop, and then plant green. Anything with an A is statistically the same. So when we planted the first week of April with no cover crop, our yields were about 73, 74 bushels per acre. But when we had a cover crop, we saw significant reductions in soybean yield, so going down to maybe 55, 45 bushels per acre. For that last week of April, though, yields were statistically the same to that no cover crop and early planting, and equally high whether we had a cover crop or not. End of May planting date with no cover crop, again, high yields, but some reductions with that cover crop. Similar trend the second year of the study. So this is also Worcester, Ohio. The field was right next to each other. Second year, fairly similar trends. Our ultra early, that first week of April with no cover crop, didn't yield quite as high, but still significantly higher than when we had a cover crop. But then when we bounced to that early planting date, so just that last week of April, statistically all high yielding and no difference whether there's a cover crop or not, and then no differences either for the end of May. Why? This is the stand. So what we noticed with our cover crop treatments, when we had a cover crop in early planting date, there was a really large reduction in plant stand. So this first year, no cover crop, ultra early planting, our stand was 81,000 plants per acre, but we went down to 22,000 plants per acre. So pretty big reduction, 4-time reduction there. Our seeding rate was 120,000 seeds per acre. This is lower than what I would recommend, but for research, we wanted to test the system to really see if that cover crop could protect the soybeans. So that's why we had that lower seeding rate. But even the end of April, our stands were really, really low for statistically high yields. Our stand there was only 50,000 plants per acre. Normal planting date with no cover crop, we were up to 116. So much higher plant populations, but really the same yield as when we had a lower plant population, but earlier planting date. And what's interesting is that trend held true the second year. We were down that 20,000 plant per acre mark when we had a cover crop, and then 50,000 plants per acre with no cover crop, which is still not ideal, but we see that very large reduction for those early planting dates with the cover crop, but fewer differences for the more just early and normal planting dates. So this is South Charleston. So what you'll see here are our early planting dates at the top. These are all taken July 8th. And our normal planting date at the bottom, you can see the amount of biomass we have still in July, where those cover crops were at. And what you'll see for the early planting dates is more gaps and uneven stands. Then the later planting dates are more uniform. But then by September, it all kind of looks the same. So soybeans, even with those low populations, can compensate really nicely by increasing the number of branches. So South Charleston, the first year, there was no interaction of planting date and cover crop, so we can look at those factors separately. So this is yield by planting date. Whether it was the first week of April or last week of April, yields were the same, getting close to 80 bushels per acre, but we do see that significant reduction when we go out to the end of May. Plant populations here were only 65 to 75,000 plants per acre, but 100,000 plants per acre for our end of May planting date. So to me, this really shows the importance of early planting date. So it's better to plant maybe a little bit earlier, have a poor stand, but higher yields. Cover crop effect, the first year in South Charleston, nothing. So whether we had one or not, didn't matter, yields were the same. Second year in South Charleston, very similar trend to Worcester. So in research, this is nice when we have consistent trends. It doesn't usually happen. But second year in South Charleston, there was a planting date and cover crop interaction. So anything with an A, again, is statistically the same yield. So our highest yields were that ultra early planting. And remember, that was March 30th. So March 30th, no cover crop, close to 80 bushels per acre. Statistically, the same yield for the end of May. But again, with that early planting, we see those fairly large yield reductions with a cover crop. Those do not show up for the early planting date, and there's not a whole lot of differences either with that normal planting date. So really, where we're seeing the biggest yield penalty is really early planting with a cover crop. And again, this is end of March, first week of April. If you have a more normal planting date or just early, but not ultra early, there seems to be less of an effect. Stands are here. So again, no cover crop, ultra early planting, 70,000 plants per acre, and we dropped to 34,000 to 48,000 plants per acre with a cover crop. So really the key takeaways here, if you have really early planting, your stand is going to be lower, and it's going to be lower. Yeah, go ahead.
Do you suspect cooler, wetter soils for that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So why? Why was a stand reduction? And we don't know exactly. This is more research we want to do more in depth. I have several theories, and probably multiple ones are true. We know with a cover crop you have cooler, wetter soils, so that alone can be a problem. With the cover crop, you can probably hold that. If there's snow or frost, you could hold that maybe a little bit more. In Worcester, I'm pretty sure there were slugs, and I think where there was a cover crop, there was more slug damage. There was frost damage. There was probably disease. There was bean leaf beetle. So there was multiple issues that happened. I can't pinpoint one or the other. Yeah, South Charleston wasn't as bad, but you're right. There are voles in South Charleston. Yep. Yeah, so your stand, if you plant ultra early, your stand's going to be lower. So we were more that 50 to 70,000 mark without a cover crop, but then dropped to 20 to 48,000 with a cover crop. Northern Ohio, we got away with planting really early the first year. The second year, it didn't work out as well. In Northern Ohio, I would feel more comfortable planting maybe the end of April, looking at our data. West Central Ohio, though, with no cover crop, end of March, early April seemed to be fine as long as you had no cover crop, but there was no additional advantage over the end of April. So if you're risk adverse, you're not going to get extra yield by planting March 30th versus April 30th. But you can, and we did do it 2 years. And the other really big key takeaway of this study was how good that soybean plants are for compensating for low plant populations. When we went out to these plots that had 20,000 plants per acre in August, you really couldn't tell. They just really branched, they filled in. So this really, makes you think about replanting decisions. Of course, 20,000 plants per acre is something you would want to replant, but maybe leaving 50 or 60, 70,000 plants per acre would be okay. It depends on the evenness, and it depends on your weed populations, because if you have low plant population, weeds can become out of control. So there's a lot of caveats and things to think through, but soybean plants are really good at compensating for low populations. So this study was funded by Ohio Soybean Council. This is my student Seth. He defends his thesis in 1 week, so send Seth all of your good thoughts because he needs them. He definitely needs all of the good thoughts. So I'll turn it over to Jamie and Taylor.
My name's Taylor Dill. I'm the Ag and Natural Resources educator for Darke County, and I was really excited to partner on this research with both Laura and Jamie. Unfortunately, I forgot that Aaron was going before us, so I was going to throw you some weather data as well. But like Aaron mentioned, we are having more frequent storms, and within those frequent storms, we're having increased precipitation as well. So not only are we having more storms more frequently, we're also having bigger storms as well. So for all of you that are farming, you know that equals during planting season that you're probably going to have some crusting issues, especially if we dry up right after that. And when we have crusting, we have more seedling death, you have stand issues, you have emergence issues, and then we look into replanting, and the cost of seed continues to rise. So it can be a real problem economically, and so we wanted to be a part of this study to see how cover crops can assist with those issues. Jamie?
Okay, so we know that there has been a lot of research done with cover crops. And through that research, we know that cover crops can enhance the soil health. We know they improve microbial communities, they improve nutrient use efficiency, as well as influence the soil crust strength. So we are looking at how this can help. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to figure out if our cover crops will induce a crop response of some sort, and ultimately if we can get some kind of a yield response as well. The objectives of this research is to examine the use of cover crops to physically protect the soil surface. We want to reduce soil crusting after heavy rainfall events, and I didn't proofread, so I spelled it wrong. We want to improve soybean emergence by protecting that soil crust and improve survival of soybean seedlings, leading to not having to replant as well as other issues. The second objective of this research is to look into developing research-based interactive learning modules. This will help to empower farmers to make decisions regarding the use of cover crops on their farm and how it can benefit them the most.
Awesome. So we're focusing this research over in Western Ohio, as in we are both in Western Ohio. I have 3 research projects set up for Darke County, and I think you have 2 in,
I have 2 in
Auglaize County. The really also awesome thing with this project is I finally talked my dad into trying out cover crops specifically for this project. He always had trouble justifying trying it out, and I said, you know, well, you don't want to do strip trials anyway to see what your management will be, but I thought this was a really great project to look at for, especially if you have not looked at cover crops before on your farm. So this is a general field map of what we are going for. A very simple layout for you, so it's easy with your equipment. It's easy on us to find as well. So cover crop, no cover. So we're setting it up in a strip trial. You'll have just those 2 treatments, and we want between 3 and 4 replications. 4 is generally what we want, but most of our on-farm research ends up having 3, and that works out just fine. So you'll plant your cover crop in the fall, and then you'll terminate how you would normally terminate. So if you're a farmer who already cover crops, you can terminate when your normal general termination is. And if you're new to cover crops, usually around 2 weeks-ish before. Then on your planting date, we'll come in and place sensors under your residue. So those sensors will measure the force of rainfall, and then we'll come and take more measurements after you have rainfall throughout the season. We'll also use moisture sensors, and we'll be taking the temperature as well on your planting date and after heavy rain. So we're actually going to be measuring the force of rain and how that affects soil crusting throughout the season on your cover versus no cover crop. The impacts, well, we'll actually get to identify cover crop management practices, and they'll help. We'll see how we actually get to mitigate our extreme weather. So we'll be able to quantify what feel like we've been objectively seeing. So we can possibly increase cover crop adoption throughout Ohio. Darke County's cover crop adoption is about 10% because not everyone feels like they can justify this investment. But if we can prove that your investment is actually paying off because it is protecting your actual investment for your crops, we might have higher cover crop adoption in general. And to develop economically sustainable strategies, and we can promote stewardship, as I believe we're also looking at the economics behind as well. And if you want to participate in the coming year, You can be an experienced cover crop farmer, or if you've never tried them out before, and like my dad, you want to try them out, but never necessarily had the opportunity to really look at what you wanted to look at. I think this is a really fantastic opportunity to look at that. And on your end, we really only need your yield data out of it. We need you to take out your, leave out your strips of no cover, but the rest of the work that we need from you is just the yield information, and then we come and take the rest of the measurements. But with that, do y'all have any questions for us or Laura?